Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Courtney Ryan, and today we're talking about a very interesting topic that definitely caught my attention, and that is that a third of men under 30 aren't having sex. I know this seems like a bit of a spicy topic for my channel, but I think it's really interesting when you look at the data and the research behind it and really getting into the nitty-gritty of why this is taking place. I'll be honest, my initial thought was, it's all the incels or the people who, have never interacted with women and all of this, but it actually goes much further than that, and there's a lot of really interesting details that I wanted to share with you because it's not really what it seems to be. So I'm going to take you along with me as I look at some of these articles and we can just kind of go through it together. So let's get started. They're calling it the Great American Sex Drought, which I thought was kind of funny, but anyways. This article was really interesting from the New Yorker. It says, how everyone got so lonely. The recent decline in rates of sexual activity has been attributed variously to sexism, neoliberalism, and women's increased economic independence. How fair are those claims, and will we be saved by the advent of the sex robot? This was April 4th, 2022. It goes on to say stuff about the pandemic, how people were thinking this would increase sexual activity, but it actually did the opposite. Not so obvious is why, for several years before the virus appeared on our shores, we had already been showing distinct signs of sluggishness in the attraction and affiliation departments. In 2018, nearly a quarter of Americans, the highest number ever recorded, reported having no sex at all in the previous 12 months. Only 39% reported having intercourse once or more a week, a drop of 12 percentage points since 1996. The chief driver of this so-called sex drought is not as one might expect, the aging of the American population, but the ever more abstemious habits of the young. Since the 911, the Great American Sex Drought. One moment. Since the 1990s, the proportion of American high school students who are virgins has risen from 45% to 60%. People who are in their early 20s are estimated to be 2.5 times more likely to be sexually inactive than members of Gen X were at the same age. And basically it goes along to say that there are a bunch of different reasons why this is taking place. So I had made some notes about the most prominent ones that I was seeing across a ton of different articles. One thing that I saw a few times was low testosterone and how it's continuing to decrease in men as the years go by. I had seen some statistics about it. I can put a little graph in here to show you. But I think this is really interesting, and I think a lot of this has to do with products that we're using, food that we're consuming, chemicals and all of our stuff, plastic everywhere. I know I sound a little bit wacky saying that, and a couple years ago, if someone said that, I would have been like, okay. But it makes sense when you think about it and how it's continuing to decrease in men as the years go by. And on the flip side for women, I think birth control has really affected this as well. But this video is about men under 30 not having sex, so I will save that for a different video and I can kind of talk about my experience with birth control because it was terrible. But anyway, moving on. And the second thing I saw that I really didn't even think about until I saw in some of these articles was the decline of youthful marriage. So it says more people are ditching the traditional young marriage and waiting until they're older to tie the knot. There are more people in their 20s who don't have a live-in partner. So under those circumstances, I think less sex is obviously going to happen. Americans in their 30s and 40s and beyond, meanwhile, are much more likely to be married than those in their 20s. These age groups are now more likely to have sex in a given year than their younger peers. Increase in casual relationships, talking stages, etc. equals one-off hookups, random one-night stands, instead of that increased consistent intimacy, which I think is really interesting. But when we're talking about the decline of youthful marriage, it was very normal, 50 years ago for people to get married when they were 18, 20, 18 might be a little bit young, 20, 22. Now, out of all the people I know, it's a good 50-50 of who is married by this point in life and who is not. I'm 26, just for reference. I'm engaged. I'm going to be married next year, so I'll be married technically at 27. I have a handful of friends who got married at 23, 24, some 26, but I have a lot of friends who are my age and still single. or they have a boyfriend or someone that they haven't really been dating that long. I have a friend who is like 31 or 32 and she's not married. So it's just very interesting to look at the difference and how people are waiting so much longer now to get married versus in the past. And I think it does have a lot to do with women's financial independence and women, making money and not necessarily relying on their husbands for income and being able to do it for themselves. And that being less of a factor as to why women get into marriages, solely just relying on someone for money. I don't think that's really as much of the case anymore, although it still is for some people. It's not as common. I see this conversation happening a lot on social media of like, you should wait until you're older to get married. Like, don't waste your 20s in a marriage. Wait until you're in your 30s or wait until you're older and have fun in your 20s. And I think that's something that's being talked about a lot more now than it obviously was in the past. I mean, you see people posting on TikTok about it and just really all over the place. I think men in general feel as though they can wait a little bit longer or wait until they're a little bit older to get married because they're not really dealing with a fertility window. And I don't want to seem offensive by saying that, but that's just kind of the truth. They don't have to worry about that. So it makes sense as to why men feel as though they can wait a little bit longer to get married. But, as women have kind of taken on a more masculine role, they're kind of starting to adopt the male mindset when it comes to that as well, which I think is really interesting. Women are waiting until they're in their late 30s to have kids now, and everything's just getting so pushed back and less rushed. And I think there are positives and negatives to that I won't totally get into today. But what I'm really trying to say here is that it makes sense when you look at it from this whole like young marriage perspective, because people just aren't getting married under 30 as much as they used to. People are waiting until they're a little bit older or even late 20s. But when you think about men specifically, they wait even longer than women and often are a little bit older than the women that they're with. So it makes sense when you think about it. But before I had read these articles, I really never thought about it that way. The next point here, which kind of involves hypergamy a bit, is the fact that more men are unemployed or maybe aren't making as much money as a lot of their female counterparts. So this says, for most of the past 3 decades, 20-something men and women reported similar rates of sexlessness, but that has changed in recent years. Since 2008, the share of men younger than 30 reporting no sex has nearly tripled to 28%. That's a much steeper increase than the 8 percentage point increase reported among their female peers. There are several potential explanations for this. Labor force participation among young men has fallen, particularly in the aftermath of the last recession. Researchers also see a connection between labor force participation and stable relationships, she said. The survey showed, for instance, that 54% of unemployed Americans didn't have a steady romantic partner, compared with 32% among the employed. This is obviously nothing new. This is a topic that has been discussed a lot, especially here on YouTube. We've talked about hypergamy before and the fact that even though now women are making more money and are more successful in the workforce, they still tend to go for men who are either at their level or still above them. So this is no surprise. I was not surprised to see the 54% of unemployed men are not in relationships or don't have a romantic partner. That just goes back to what women are attracted to and what women look for. And a lot of the time, unemployed men are not kind of in that equation. And again, I don't say that to be hurtful. I just say that looking at these statistics. So that one was more obvious to me as a reason why a third of men under 30 are not having sex, because a lot of men in this age demographic are unemployed. And that leads me into my next point here, which is that more young people than ever are still living with their parents. So this says, young men are also more likely to be living with their parents than young women. In 2014, for instance, 35% of men ages 18 to 34 were living in their parents' homes, compared with 29% of women in that age group. At the risk of, this is funny, it says, at the risk of stating the obvious, when you're living at home, it's probably harder to bring sexual partners into your bedroom. So obviously when it comes to bringing people home, maybe men feel embarrassed to bring people home if they're still living with their parents. I've had a lot of men reach out to me and say, hey, I still live at home, I'm 24, should I even bother getting a girlfriend? Taking an even deeper look at this than just, bringing people home to your parents' house, a lot of women like I said before, tend to go for men who are either at their level or above. And of course, there are women out there that don't care. I think when you're young and you're trying to save money, or you don't really have a job where you can support yourself yet, especially as expensive as things are nowadays, it's very normal to live at home with your parents when you're young. Like, that's nothing to be embarrassed or ashamed about. Of course, maybe you should be working to a goal to eventually be able to support yourself and move out. But when you're in your early 20s, that's a very normal thing these days compared to, again, before, when more people were getting married younger. They were moving out on their own with their wives and living together versus, being 24, unmarried, and still living at home the way things are now. So things are just very different. The dynamic is incredibly different. But as this states, more men are living at home with their parents than women are. So when you think about a woman who is going for someone at her level or above, maybe that includes a man who is living out on his own, or is successful on his own, or has his own apartment or house, or whatever it is. Of course, that's not always the case. I don't want to make it seem like if you live at home with your parents, you're doomed. When I actually met my fiance, he was still living at home. I was in college. He was like 23 or 24. So it's very normal to be in your early 20s and still living at home. And I didn't ever think anything of it. But all of these things kind of tie in together. The unemployed, the living at home with your parents. I mean, it's kind of a common theme here. But the last thing I'm going to talk about is technology and porn. So this says, now, people hide behind their iPhones, meet via dating app profiles, busy themselves behind computer games, and so forth. Virtual meetings have replaced in-person interactions. Pornography is the internet's most popular go-to. For many, sex is less an interpersonal relationship, no matter how shallow, and more an act in which the partner, if he or she exists, is a fantasy appendage. We are more into ourselves, into others less. Is it really such a surprise that sex is on the decline? Nope. This also says, one final factor that may be affecting American sexual habits at all ages is technology. There are a lot more things to do at 10 o'clock at night right now than there were 20 years ago. Streaming video, social media, console games, everything else, including porn. That may speak to the drop-off among the sexually active. The share of people who are having relations once a week or more now sits at 39%, compared with 51% in 1996. As our interactions and meeting people increase more virtually and online versus in person, you can imagine that there also will be a decrease in sexual activity among people, because a lot of people can't even meet someone online. There's a ton of men out there that can't even get a match on a dating app. So how the heck are they supposed to meet people? And now if you approach someone in public, they freak out and post a video online trying to publicly humiliate you. If you didn't see the Entitled Gym Girl video I posted recently, I went into detail about what this looks like for the future of dating. Are people going to stop, meeting in person or approaching altogether because of the way things are online? I mean, it's really just interesting to think about the future of dating and where things are going to go. But it's interesting, but also not surprising to me that a third of men under 30 aren't having sex. So I really just wanted to share these statistics with you and this data, and kind of just look at why this is happening. There are clearly a lot of reasons as to why this is happening, and when you really take a minute to think about it, it makes complete sense. And it's much more than just, people are sitting behind their screens. There's a ton of other reasons as well, but I do think a lot of it has to do with the rise of social media and just how much less we interact with people in person. And even now, a lot of people are working from home. They aren't even meeting people at work or out and about. A lot of people are able to do everything from the comfort of their own home. So just an interesting thought. I would love to hear what you guys think down below. If you think there are any other reasons that I didn't talk about today as to why a third of men under 30 aren't having sex, please let me know down in the comments. I would love to get an interesting conversation going down below. But if you like this video or found it helpful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel to be in the loop for when I release new content. If you haven't already, be sure to follow me over on Instagram at Courtney Christine Ryan. I love connecting with all of you guys over on there as well. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.